Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something really fascinating. We're going on a totally neutral, scholarly deep dive into comparative theology. We are going straight to the source texts and philosophical traditions of both Eastern and Western thought, really trying to unpack the profound foundational differences between their concepts of the divine. We're going to look closely at the bedrock architecture of Hinduism and Christianity to understand how they construct the very idea of God. And that brings us to the central question we're exploring today. Is the Hindu Trimurti just the biblical Trinity by another name? I mean, it's super tempting to think so, right? Because at a surface level, the similarities are honestly striking. Both traditions feature this really prominent triadic concept of the divine, a sort of three-in-one framework. But as you'll see when we analyze the source material, digging just an inch deeper exposes entirely incompatible views of reality, time, and the fundamental nature of existence itself. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll cover 1. The ontology of God. 2. Trimurti versus the Trinity. 3. Sectarianism versus co-equal worship. 4. Pantheons and exclusive deities. 5. Avatars versus the incarnation. And finally, 6. The irreconcilable divide. Starting with part 1, the ontology of God. Let's start at the widest lens of our conceptual funnel. In Hinduism, particularly within non-dualistic schools like Advaita Vedanta, the foundational reality is termed Nirguna Brahman. So what is that? Well, it's an infinite, impersonal, formless, ultimate reality. It operates as a system of monism or panentheism, meaning literally everything in the universe, including all the localized deities, is ultimately an emanation or an extension of this single reality. There's no hard barrier between the creator and the created. In fact, the individual soul, the Atman, is considered ultimately identical to the singular, unconditioned absolute. Now, contrast that entirely with the foundation of Christian orthodoxy, which is rooted in strict monotheism. The biblical doctrine relies on creation ex nihilo, which means a distinctly personal God created the universe out of nothing. Here you have a really rigid creator-creature distinction. God is defined as a single, simple, spiritual being who remains completely separate from his creation in essence. The universe isn't an emanation of God's substance, it's an entirely separate creation altogether. Moving right along to part 2, Trimurti versus the Trinity. So, delving into the Hindu Trimurti, we encounter Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer. According to the ancient texts, these are basically personifications of cosmic functions, and they're tied directly to the cyclical timeline of the universe. It's one ultimate reality projecting into different functional roles. Structurally, this actually aligns much closer to the ancient Christian heresy known as modalism, where one divine essence just plays different roles at different times. But the Orthodox Christian Trinity fundamentally rejects that idea. The Trinity is defined as one God eternally existing as three distinct persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, who share the exact same divine essence or ousia simultaneously. This crucial point is captured perfectly in this distillation by theologian Wayne Grudem. Classical Trinitarianism asserts that the Trinity represents a simultaneous, loving relationship and a perfect unity of being. The Father, Son, and Spirit are co-eternal and co-equal. They don't just take turns performing different cosmic tasks. Rather, every outward action of the Trinity is inseparable. They act via a common power, and that is completely distinct from a singular essence, merely playing different sequential roles across the ages of the cosmos. All right, part 3, sectarianism versus co-equal worship. Now, what's really interesting about this next part is how these theological structures dictate actual practice on the ground. Hindu henotheism means the Trimurti is actually rarely worshipped equally. Sectarian elevation is totally the norm. For instance, a Vaishnavite views Vishnu as the supreme Saguna Brahman, which is the absolute with attributes, and treats Brahma as a subordinate creation literally born from Vishnu's navel. A Shaivaite, on the other hand, elevates Shiva as supreme. And in Shaktism, the goddess Devi, or Shakti, is supreme to the point where sectarian myths assert Shiva is completely powerless, essentially a corpse, without her activating energy. In stark contrast to that sectarian elevation, classical Christian orthodoxy demands absolute co-equal worship. From the Athanasian Creed onward, the core confession is that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit must be worshipped and glorified together, equally. No person of the Trinity is subordinate in their divine nature. The unity of their essence requires a unity of worship. You literally cannot elevate the Father by subordinating the Son or elevate the Spirit by diminishing the Father. Part 4. Pantheons and exclusive deities. So, Hinduism beautifully and expansively accommodates a staggering pantheon. The tradition speaks of 330 million devas, or spiritual beings. It embraces endless, localized personal gods, like Ganesha, Surya, or Lakshmi, as entirely valid interim lenses to help a devotee realize the singular, formless Brahman. We see this vividly in the Smarta tradition, which practices Panchatana Puja, the equal worship of 5 distinct deities. Because everything is an emanation of the ultimate reality, all these forms are valid pathways that point to the exact same transcendent truth.
And this brilliantly highlights the divide between polymorphic monism and strict monotheism. The biblical Godhead demands absolute exclusivity, a concept echoed heavily throughout prophetic texts like Isaiah. It fundamentally rejects any broader pantheon or lesser manifestations. There are no other valid lenses, no alternate spiritual beings, and no array of avatars through which to worship the Creator. It is an exclusive relationship, period, without alternate pathways.
Part 5. Avatars versus the Incarnation. Let's move to the narrowest point of our funnel and see how this builds. Take the Hindu avatar. When cosmic balance, or dharma, is severely disrupted by evil, a deity, most commonly Vishnu, descends into the material world in a physical form, like Rama or Krishna. The key metaphysical characteristic here is that this descent is temporary and cyclical. The avatar restores the balance and then departs, but because time in this cosmology is cyclical, the balance will inevitably be disrupted again, making another avatar necessary in a future age.
Now, juxtapose that cyclical avatar with the Christian doctrine of the Incarnation, mathematically defined by the early church councils as the hypostatic union. According to Orthodoxy, the incarnation of the second person of the Trinity is a singular, unrepeated, historical event. As the Gospel of John states, the Word became flesh. This wasn't just a temporary costume to fix a cyclical imbalance, it was a permanent union of divine and human nature, done once and for all, with the specific purpose of redeeming humanity from sin in a linear timeline.
Which brings us to Part 6, the irreconcilable divide. So when we lay it all out and look closely at the source materials, we realize that attempting to map the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit directly onto Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, well, it's basically a massive category error. On one side, Hinduism offers an impersonal, polymorphic monism operating on a cyclical timeline where deities are functional manifestations. And on the other, Christianity presents a personal, relational monotheism operating on a linear timeline of creation where the Trinity exists as simultaneous, co-equal persons. They are just entirely different architectures of reality. I want to leave you with a final, somewhat provocative thought to chew on. If the Christian concept of the Trinity implies that ultimate reality is, at its core, a being in communion, a perfect, simultaneous relationship of love, and humans are created in that image, how does that alter the very essence of how we view our own human relationships and our deep need for community? It is absolutely a fascinating question to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.